Welcome back to What Stories Say with Seth and Seth, our theme songs portion. I'm Seth,
I'm Seth.
and today I want to do something a little bit different, Seth.
Okay.
I do want to go into a theme song which I picked out for Pip in Great Expectations by Charles Dickens.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually want to start by talking a little bit about and we did this earlier at some point, but I want to do it again. I want to talk a little bit about theme songs, why I use theme songs, why we're doing this, and how it affects my work as a life coach, and how it's affected my work as a therapist in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But I specifically want to talk about, and I don't know if we've talked about this on this podcast or not, but if we have, I'm going to talk about it again because it's fascinating. I'm going to talk about when we lived in Logan, about 5 or 6 years ago now.
Yeah, something like that.
When we lived in Logan, I worked at a women's shelter for battered and abused women, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And while I was there were several people who were in a kind of a support capacity. So I was there as a therapist.
Right.
And then we had people who were there in kind of more support capacities, such as, bachelor's level social workers and people who were there just to be supports to these women.
Right.
And so three of these people, two women and one man, were there. They were and it was interesting because as I did my work and as they got to know the same women that I was working with, and the women would sometimes share with them what we talked about in our sessions. I never shared, but sometimes the women would, and then these people would come to me and be like, "Wow, that's really interesting. I've never seen anybody do that." And one of the things that they were really fascinated about was that I would frequently ask women to come up with a theme song and bring that theme song to the session, and we would listen to it and talk about it, and I would learn a lot about people by the choice of their theme song.
Right.
And so these three personages were really interested in this, and they wanted to know how it worked.
Right.
So I invited them to come over, and I don't know if you remember this. They came over to our house for dinner, and I told them, bring a theme song.
Oh, I do remember this vaguely.
And I'll tell you about yourself based on the song that you choose. I'll tell you something about you that I shouldn't know, because you've never told me, but I'm going to tell you. And anyways, they kind of thought it sounded like magic, so they really.
I mean, it kind of does.
Yeah, I don't think they believed that I could do that.
Yeah.
So they came over to our house, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had dinner, and after dinner, we all sat down in the living room, turned on the TV, and each of them was going to bring up their song, right? That they had chosen. And so the first person, she brought up her song, and we listened to it, right? And I told her a little bit about herself, and she was kind of amazed. She's like, "That's almost impossible. You could know these things." And then I told her, I said, I'm going to tell you something else about you that you don't know that I know based on that song you played for me, but I'm not going to tell you in front of my family because it's a little bit more private, and I don't think you want everybody to know.
Right.
Which I did tell her later, and that was that she had recently been divorced, but nobody in the area knew.
Mm-hmm.
She hadn't told anybody.
Wow.
And so I said, I think that you've recently been divorced. And she was like, how could you possibly know that? And I explained to her how her song really demonstrated to me that's what her life was, what she was going through in her life at that moment. And
and that's really impressive.
Yeah, it was kind of fun. And then the guy, my favorite one was the guy. He gets out his song and he's like, I gotcha. I just picked the silly song that had nothing to do with me, and he thought he was going to really pull one over on me, right? And I don't know if you remember, he had a little Hawaiian song that was played on a ukulele, and and we listened to the song, and it was like he was challenging me. I'll bet you can't get anything out of this.
Yeah.
And I asked him, I said, so I bet you've never left Cache Valley. this county. He lived in Utah and lived in Logan.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I bet you've never left Cache Valley.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, how do you know that from that song? And I said, and I'm also willing to bet that you're going to school right now at the local university. You've got your own apartment, but you eat dinner at home 4 to 6 times a week with your parents.
Yeah.
And he was like, what? How could you get that out of that song? So I said, I told you, if you play a song for me, I can tell you things about yourself that I shouldn't know, because your song will tell me about you. And then the third person, she had a song in Welsh, so it wasn't even in English.
Yeah.
And she was like, yeah, there's no way you're going to figure this out. And so we listened to the song, and obviously I didn't understand the words because they were in Welsh.
Yeah.
But with her again, I said, I think, based on this song, based on what you just showed me, you are currently working with the company that we're working for in a supportive role as a bachelor's level.
Yeah.
And that, of course, I knew, because that's what she, and I said, but you really want to be a therapist. And you're only doing this because you're afraid to go back to school. And she was just like, what? and it's funny because she then immediately quit her job and went back to school.
Wow. And
the guy immediately quit his job and went out to school in Seattle, Washington. It's like, I'm getting out of Cache Valley. And the other girl, I don't remember. I don't know what happened with her. I can't remember. She had the most kind of clinical issues anyways. And so when I talked with her, it was, she was struggling with that divorce, and it was a really rough, she was just having a rough time. But the other two just immediately went and did what they thought, what I knew they wanted to do all along. And I told them, this is what your song is telling me. These are your desires. And it was really fascinating. So theme songs, while we're having fun with this, and coming up with theme songs for these literary characters, I think I want you as an audience to know that theme songs are meaningful and they're powerful, and they can. When I meet with a client and I ask them to bring in a theme song, it does a couple of things. One, it helps me to learn more about that client and what they're struggling with. But two, it helps that client to know, to have trust in my ability to help them, because if I can listen to their theme song and then tell them something that they haven't told me, then they feel like, okay, this guy understands. This person gets it. And it builds an initial amount of trust that would normally take weeks to build that amount of trust.
Yeah.
You can connect through music in some really, really profound ways.
Absolutely.
So that's what I wanted to share before we moved on. But I do have my song, and the story is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. And Seth, you're not as familiar with this story, so this is mostly going to be a one-sided thing today. But you can.
That's okay. I'm excited to hear what you have to say about it.
So this is particularly his theme song for his relationship with Estella.
So who's he?
So Pip is the main character of the book. And he starts out. And I'll just give you a really quick, brief thing. He starts out as a. He's living with his sister. His mom and dad died when he was young, too young to remember anything about them. He's living with his sister and her husband. His sister is very abusive, physically, emotionally, in every way. She's just abusive, and she's abusive to both him and her husband. But her husband is really, really gentle. He's a blacksmith. And he's very gentle, and he's very kind, and he really loves Pip, and that's very clear from the very beginning. So it starts out with Pip in this situation, and he's planning on apprenticing with Joe when he gets old enough.
Is that the husband?
Joe is the husband. And so he's the husband, the blacksmith. So he's planning on apprenticing with Joe when he gets old enough. And he and Joe really, really get along well, but they're obviously both kind of being abused by his sister.
Uh-huh.
Well, it ends up that, and there's a lot to this story, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit. Okay. Ends up, Pip gets before, as he's waiting to be old enough to be apprenticed, and he's not in school. They're not putting him in school. He's just there. He's not learning anything, but Pip's family has a guy who calls himself their uncle. I don't know if he is or not for sure, but he gets Pip this opportunity to go to this rich house with this old lady who wants somebody to come play at her house. And so Pip shows up at this house to, play and entertain this woman, but he's not feeling inclined to play. But anyways, while he's there,
is this playing just like a kid would? She
just wants a child to be around to play.
Okay.
But he quickly finds out that she has an adopted daughter, and so the adopted daughter, whose name is Estella, she and Pip start playing together. She obviously doesn't like Pip. She doesn't like that he's coarse and unrefined, and he's
right.
But the other lady makes her play with him, and Pip is struck by Estella's beauty. She's just really, really beautiful.
Okay.
But she's mean to Pip, and she tells him that he's coarse and he's uncouth, and she doesn't want to be around him, and that makes him feel uncomfortable about who he is, and going home to his
it would
and going home to his home where there's a bunch of where Joe is very uncouth. Joe can't read and write, and he can't he works in the smith, and he gets dirty, and so Pip for several years comes to the house about once or twice a week to play with Estella, and the longer he's there, the more he's kind of falling in love with her. And but the whole time, the Miss Havisham is the old lady, and Miss Havisham the whole time is trying to teach Estella how to break young men's hearts. And so Pip is kind of the practice. She's the practice person. She's having Estella practice on him. That's why she actually wanted him there.
Okay.
So that she could use him to teach Estella how to be cruel and mean and break young men's hearts.
Wow, that's something.
Yes, it's a very fascinating story. Anyways, after as Pip starts to get older, and I think one of the things that we see is as he starts to get older and into his youth, and he's no longer a child, I think that Miss Havisham starts to be afraid that Estella is going to actually like Pip, so she ends up sending him back and having him start his apprenticeship at the smith, with the blacksmith. And so he goes back, and he still remembers Estella, and he's still in love with her, but doesn't really get to see her much anymore because he is working now.
Yeah.
And he does occasionally go to Miss Havisham's house, but not a lot. But when he does, for a long time, Estella is gone because she's been sent off to a boarding school to learn how to be a lady and all this. And but anyways, eventually, Pip learns from a lawyer, comes and finds him, and learns that he has this expectation, or in other words, somebody is leaving him some money.
Oh, is that what that means?
Yes, that's what the expectation is. He's got expectations.
Well, now I understand the title of the book.
Yes, when he becomes 21 and he's an adult, which in that time, 21 would have been the age of adulthood for that kind of thing. When he becomes 21, he's going to come into this large sum of money.
Right.
And the person who's leaving him the money wants him to start to learn how to be a gentleman.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, of course, Pip is excited because he's been feeling already like he's uncouth and gross and as a blacksmith, and now he gets to go be what he thinks Estella wants.
Right.
Pip also believes that this expectation, this money that's going to come to him, he believes it's coming from Miss Havisham, and that Miss Havisham is planning on him marrying Estella. That he thinks that she's bringing them together and that she's making this happen, and that she meant this all along. That's why she thinks that she had him over to her house all this time. And anyway, so he continues to have a relationship with Estella. She continues to be mean, but he continues to have hope that when Miss Havisham tells him that they're supposed to get married, that Estella will come around. And eventually he learns that Miss Havisham is not the person who's giving him this money, but it's actually a criminal who he met as a boy, and he kind of helped by the guy had threatened to kill him if he didn't help him, so he helped him, and then this criminal came into some money and decided that he was going to turn this little boy that helped him out into a gentleman.
Okay.
And so Pip now is kind of devastated because now he realizes, hey, wait a minute, I've been thinking Estella was meant for me this whole time, that was Miss Havisham's intention all along, and now I know that's not true, so now I don't have any hope, because she's being mean to him the whole time.
Yeah.
And he's still in love with her though, and she ends up marrying kind of his arch nemesis enemy of the book. She ends up marrying him, and Pip, the whole book is just miserable because of this relationship with Estella. So that is the story.
That's kind of a depressing story.
It is, but it doesn't end depressing. It is depressing all the way through. Pip's an idiot. He really is. Yeah. But Joe is amazing. The whole way through, Joe is amazing. And eventually Pip's sister dies, and Joe is able to remarry and marries a really, really sweet girl that knew Pip also, and that was a good friend of Pip's. And so then that ends up in a much better place, and Pip ends up, of course, the criminal, he can't keep taking criminals' money.
No.
So he loses his expectation, so he's penniless. But he has friends that he's made along the way, and his friends help him. And so it actually ends up...
The real expectation was the friends we made along the way.
Exactly. So it ends up... I think the ending of the book is actually pretty cheerful. But throughout the book, it's not. So I've given you this whole story. And now the song that I feel is really perfect for Pip in his relationship with Estella is "You Give Love a Bad Name" by Bon Jovi. And just the sound of it already works, right?
Yeah, I can see it.
But I'm going to start off, he says, "Shot through the heart and you're to blame. Darling, you give love a bad name." And it's the first time that he sees Estella as a little boy. It's like he's in love with her, right?
Yeah.
He's shot through the heart immediately, and she's the one to blame. But she's mean to him. And so, you give love a bad name. I mean, that's just the introduction of the whole relationship between these two characters.
Yeah, absolutely.
The next line says, "An angel's smile is what you sell. You promise me heaven, then put me through hell. Chains of love got a hold on me. When passion's a prison, you can't break free." I mean, from what I told you.
Looking at this, and it's like, with the explanation that you gave for the book, I don't know that we even need to say anything about it. This is maybe the most self-explanatory song that we've done.
It totally is. I mean, it's like, if you've ever read Great Expectations, this song is Pip and Estella's song. It's a song about how I'm in love. you smile, you're wonderful. The way you look, she looks angelic, right? She looks like this perfect little girl, and then she's mean. So it's like, your looks promise me heaven, but then you put me through hell. Chains of love got a hold on me. When passion's a prison, you can't break free. And that's kind of the whole book. That's the whole point of this book, is that he's passionately loved. He can't break free, but it's hell for him because she doesn't reciprocate at all. And she does warn him. She does warn him throughout the book, like, Pip, I don't love you. I'm not going to love you. I don't love anybody because I've been raised by this Miss Havisham woman to not have a heart that feels, Anyways, it goes on. It says, "Oh, you're a loaded gun. Yeah, oh, there's nowhere to run. No one can save me. The damage is done."
So he's been pursuing this relationship for long enough that it's emotionally, at least, it's too late for him to back out.
Right. And there is one point in the story where he thinks, maybe I can go ask Biddy, who's his childhood friend. Maybe I could go ask her to marry me. But then when he goes thinking maybe he would, that's when he finds out she's married Joe, his stepfather, right, kind of thing. And not stepfather, but his sister's husband, who now his sister's dead. And Joe has now married Biddy, who's this childhood friend that he liked, but she's really gentle, and he realizes that wasn't ever going to work anyways, and he's still in love with Stella, and it doesn't matter. So the damage is done, right?
Right.
And it says, "Shot through the heart, and you're to blame. You give love a bad name. I play my part, and you play your game. You give love a bad name. Hey, you give love a bad name." So that's the whole thing. From the very beginning, that's what he's doing, right?
Yeah.
Miss Havisham brings him over, wants him to play his part. He plays his part.
Yeah.
And she plays the game of breaking boys' hearts. And he's the one that she starts with, right?
Right.
That's her game. So he plays his part, she plays her. I mean, just that image where Miss Havisham invites him over and says, "I want you to play."
Yeah.
And then has Stella come in and do her part of the game. And Miss Havisham also puts really lavish jewelry onto Stella and things to make him be even more attracted to her. So really it's the game of Miss Havisham and Estella. And poor Pip is here just playing his part.
And there's an imbalance in the line too, because the sense of, I play my part and you play your game, it's almost like even though they're together in the same place, they're playing entirely separate. They're doing entirely separate things.
Right.
His wanting to pursue a relationship with her is just completely not a part of her or Miss Havisham's context for what this whole scenario is.
Right, exactly. So it's almost, again, like you say, it's almost so explanatory as you think about this relationship between these two characters. He goes on and says, "Paint your smile on your lips, blood red nails on your fingertips. A schoolboy's dream. You act so shy. Your very first kiss was your first kiss goodbye." And it's interesting here because I'm going to tell you another part of this relationship.
Okay.
She watches him at one point. Her guardian or her adoptive mother's nephew is over, and she thinks that maybe her adopted mother is trying to set her up with this nephew. So she's really upset, and Pip gets in a fight with the nephew and beats him up. So Pip beats up the nephew.
Right.
And after that, Estella comes and tells him that he can give her a kiss.
Right.
Because he beat up the nephew. So there is actually a kiss, right? But that first kiss like it says here, that your first kiss was your first kiss goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's exactly, she wasn't saying, hey, I'm gonna kiss you because I like you. It was, I'm gonna let you kiss me because you beat up that nephew that I was afraid was here to be my, you know.
And I think it being first kiss goodbye specifically plays well into that idea of her being trained to break boys' hearts, because obviously Pip isn't going to be the last one.
Right, and Pip is not even. What's interesting about this is that Miss Havisham doesn't even think of Pip really much as a person, because he's a working boy. You know, he's and Estella is going to have lots of money, so she's not training Estella to break Pip's heart. She's just using Pip as a tool to teach Estella how to break these rich boys' hearts, these rich guys that are going to come.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because like I say, when Pip starts to get old enough, I think there's a point where Miss Havisham kind of realizes, oh, wait a minute, this is an actual person, and I got to be careful with him, and that's why she sends him away.
Right.
And so there is a goodbye. That's the first goodbye. Yeah. When he has to go back and work in the smithy, and she goes off to boarding school.
Right.
And it's not till years later that they really come back together. And then they continue to have a relationship, and then there's another goodbye, and then they have a relationship, and there's another goodbye. But she's never into Pip. You know, he's always has this vision that they're going to be together, and they're meant to be together because Miss Havisham is giving him lots of money and setting him up that way. And in the end, it's not Miss Havisham, but so it's just interesting how these songs, you know, hit specific things within the story as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It goes on, of course. Now you're a loaded gun. Now we're going to go back into that chorus. Whoa, you're a loaded gun. There's nowhere to run. No one can save me. The damage is done. Shot through the heart, and you're to blame. You give love a bad name. I play my part. You play your game. You give love a bad name.
And then it's repeating.
And then it repeats that through to the end. And it's just, I mean, that's the story between these two. He plays his part. She plays her game. She gives love a bad name. And she does, not just for Pip, but she doesn't love anybody. And in the end, she marries Pip's kind of nemesis, and he ends up being really abusive to her. But it doesn't seem that she cares that much. And she only marries the guy because she's kind of, it's kind of a, what do you call it? It's kind of a rebellion against Miss Havisham, because Miss Havisham wants her to break all these guys' hearts.
Right.
And she decides, I don't want to do that. I'm just going to marry this guy instead.
Right.
And so, anyways, just that's my theme song for Pip and Estella, and I just think it just fits that relationship so well.
Yeah.
And the wonderful thing is, the song has no resolution. There's no like, in the end, like, oh, but in the end I win your heart and you actually are better than you know. And in the book, there's no real resolution to this relationship.
Right.
That, you know, she goes off and marries his nemesis, and he ends up going overseas to work in a business office, and he does come back now and then and continues to have a good relationship with Joe. And there's actually another song for Pip that I'm not going to go into today.
Okay.
But I have a song that's for Pip and Joe, and it's actually "Hello" by Adele.
Okay.
It's actually fantastic. It's so perfect for Pip's relationship with Joe. Maybe we'll go over it just a little bit. We do have a little bit of time. Let me see if I can look up the lyrics to this one. Because I think Joe is just this really, really gentle guy, right? And while Pip is being abused by his sister, Joe kind of stands by and doesn't really do anything, but he explains later that he doesn't do anything because whenever he does intervene, she gets abusive with Joe, and then more abusive with Pip. And he says, if I just stayed out of it, she was less harsh to you than she would have been if I intervened.
Right.
So that's what he says. That's why I didn't intervene. But what happens here is Joe has been expecting Pip to work with him all along, right? He was he was raising him to be his apprentice, and he does apprentice with him for several years. But then when he comes into this sum of money, he leaves Joe behind, and he doesn't write. He has no contact basically with Joe, and he feels really guilty about it all along.
Okay.
And he feels guilty about being embarrassed about Joe when he's talking with Miss Havisham and with Estella, and so he's feeling this guilt and feels terrible for what he's doing to Joe, in the way that he feels like he must be hurting Joe's feelings and whatnot. And then near the end of the book, Pip gets really sick after he finds out who it was that was giving him money. And the convict ends up getting captured and put to death. And so Pip then is really sick. Probably got sick because he did go with the convict he went to visit the convict in jail.
Okay.
Regularly, he was there with the convict who had been giving him all this money. Anyways, he probably gets sick from something in the jail, but he's like really sick, almost dying, sick. And it ends up that Joe is there with him the whole time, and he doesn't know it because he's so sick he doesn't know who's there. But he finds out that Joe is there, and then he and Joe spend some time together. And what he realizes is that Joe is doesn't really seem to care. He's okay with it. He's okay with where he's at. So here's the song, though.
Okay.
It says, "Hello, it's me. I was wondering if after all these years you'd like to meet, to go over everything. They say that time's supposed to heal ya, but I ain't done much healing." And this is so Pip. Because he wants to go back to Joe, talk to him about all the stupid mistakes that he made and the things that he did that were hurtful to Joe.
Right.
But because like he's saying, I haven't healed. He's still feeling guilty about everything that he's done.
Right.
He says, "Hello, can you hear me? I'm in California dreaming about who we used to be when we were younger and free. I've forgotten how it felt before the world fell at our feet." And I think this is, again, obviously...
Yeah, I can definitely see what's going on there.
Right, he's going away where the world is at his feet, right? And it's interesting because throughout the book, as people learn that he's come into this expectation, they all of a sudden, people who used to either ignore him or even be mean to him are all being nice to him and, trying to, and so he's like, before the world fell at our feet. And when they were younger, and throughout the book, Joe has these kind of pet names for Pip that he uses. But once Pip comes into this expectation, the few times that he and Joe do meet, Joe calls him Sir. And it really bothers Pip. He doesn't want his dad to call him Sir, or who he's, the person who's raised him.
Right, his father figure.
Yeah, he doesn't want him to call him Sir, but Joe, because that's what Joe calls gentlemen, so there's this it's messed up their relationship. So it says, "There's such a difference between us in a million miles. Hello from the other side." And that's kind of where Pip is. He's on the other side. He's the rich person now. He's the gentleman. And so he's, there's such a difference between us when there never was. It used to be that Joe would have these pet names for him and they would just talk and sit and talk for hours, the two of them. And now Joe is not comfortable with Pip. So there's this difference between them.
Yeah.
And then he says, I must have called 1,000 times to tell you I'm sorry for everything that I've done, but when I call, you never seem to be home. And I think this line is Pip's desire, right? He keeps, throughout the book, he keeps having moments where he wants to go home and tell Joe, I'm sorry, right. Joe, I'm sorry. But in the end, he never actually does it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what this line is. I must have called 1,000 times in his mind, in his head. That's what he's done. Gone 1,000 times to tell Joe that he's sorry.
Right.
To tell you that I'm sorry for everything that I've done. But when I call, you never seem to be home. And that's just, he doesn't actually, call. He doesn't actually go because he's too embarrassed, really, to face Joe.
Right.
And tell him how that he's sorry. And then again it says, hello from the other side, hello from the outside. At least I can say that I've tried to tell you I'm sorry for breaking your heart, but it don't matter. It clearly doesn't tear you apart anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think this is again, Pip is wanting so bad to say it to Joe, that he's sorry that he broke his heart.
Right.
And he says, but it really doesn't matter. It clearly doesn't tear you apart anymore. And Joe is still living his life, right?
Yeah.
Joe is still happy, especially because the sister dies. And so Joe is not being abused.
Yeah.
And he's able to live, and he's got friends around him. So Joe's doing fine, but Pip is not.
Yeah. It's a little bit of you're dealing with a little bit of a rough story when you can say, oh, he's especially happy because his wife died.
Yes. It's funny though. What's really interesting is that Joe is very sweet about Pip's sister and his wife, and he keeps telling Pip she's a wonderful woman. She's a really good woman, and even after she's dead, he says she was a wonderful woman. Mm-hmm. So he never has negative things to say about her, but he's clearly happier when she is dead.
Right. That is interesting.
So then he says, it's no secret that the both of us are running out of time. So hello from the other side. I must have called 1,000 times to tell you I'm sorry for everything I've done, but when I call, you never seem to be home. And then that repeats. Mm-hmm. I think that just repeats over again, and I don't think there's anything new there. But that, so you got these two songs for Pip, and it's interesting because Pip is this very tragic character, really.
Yeah, I can tell.
And he has this relationship with Joe that's a really good relationship, but that relationship gets broken when he meets Estella. Mm-hmm. And even before he goes off, even before he gets the expectation, the relationship with Joe has already been broken because he's already ashamed of Joe and ashamed of himself.
Yeah.
And his position. But once he comes into that expectation, all of a sudden, he just completely leaves Joe behind, just totally abandons him.
Yeah.
And goes off with in pursuit of Estella and this expectation that he has coming in. And so you've got these two relationships. The one, now Joe is always there for Pip. Mm-hmm. When Pip needs him, Joe is there. And so you've got Joe who's always there for Pip, but you've got Pip who abandons Joe in search of Estella, who abandons Pip and marries his arch nemesis.
Yeah.
And then Joe comes back to Pip and helps him through his sickness, and eventually Pip and Joe have a really good relationship by the very end of the book. Mm-hmm. But it's a little bit of a distant relationship because Pip is overseas working, and when he does come back, on vacations and stuff, he does come and visit with Joe and his family, and in fact he gets to know Joe's children, and he's so it's a happy ending.
Okay.
In that sense, there's no resolution to the relationship with Estella, but there is a resolution to the relationship with Joe.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel like this song, Hello, is just a really good song to describe Joe and Pip's relationship, specifically Pip's relationship with Joe, not Joe's relationship with Pip, but Pip's relationship with Joe. And the song, what's the other one that we did today?
The
You Give Love a Bad Name. Yeah, You Give Love a Bad Name. It's just ideal song for his relationship with Estella. So those are my songs. What are your thoughts about those songs?
I don't know. I think they fit really well. I guess I have to go read the book now.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. What I would like to do as we move forward with this podcast now is I'd like to take an author maybe, and choose one author for about a month at a time. So we'll finish through May with some of the other stories that we have ready, but starting in June, I'd like to pick an author and then do theme songs for that author's characters throughout that month.
Okay.
So I'm gonna start with Jane Austen, and then for June, and then in July we'll pick another author.
Sounds good.
But I think Jane Austen has some very memorable characters that a lot of people are familiar
absolutely.
with, and I think that would be a good author to start with.
Mm-hmm.
And she's also one of the oldest novelists, in English history.
Mm-hmm.
There aren't a lot of people writing novels before Jane Austen's time.
Yeah. Well, novels are a novel form of storytelling.
Yeah, exactly. So
at least relative to like human history.
Right. Exactly. So we'll start there, and we'll decide whether we want to kind of go through kind of historically. So go from like a Jane Austen period to the next time period to the next time period, and hit, or if we just want to randomly select authors. One author that at some point I would really like to do is Homer.
Oh, okay.
And I'd love to do the Iliad and the Odyssey, some of the different characters from those two stories.
That'd be interesting.
Because there's some really fun characters in there that we could get some really fun theme songs for.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we'll finish out through May with just some random characters that we've selected and that we'll go through, and then starting in June, you can look forward to Jane Austen and some of Jane Austen's characters that we'll do theme songs for that month.